Hunting Season by Dr. Rockhard. Chapter 20. Hunting Season. Kevin. Adira could barely get her words out, shaking her head as she looked him over. He had changed so much and seemed a lot older. The once youthful face of a young man had become aged and damaged from being in the wilderness too long. Am I dead? No. Kevin forced a smile, trying to beat the tears from falling out of his eyes. I was gathering some supplies when I saw your stuff sitting out here. Knew who you were by that necklace Mitch gave you. He seemed hesitant saying his name, as if he hadn't said it in a long time. Adira noticed this and would have brought it up, had it not been so much of a shock to her to see her boyfriend's old friend. How is this possible? I thought you were dead. Not yet, at least. Kevin's smile faded, and he stared down at the floor in deep thought. Adira could tell something was off. Kevin, do you know what happened to... She couldn't finish, for fear that he might tell her Mitch was indeed dead. The only reason she regained hope was because Kevin was alive. If anything, they had to have escaped the grasp of the cult together. Even if Conrad was unlucky, perhaps Mitch wasn't. Kevin lifted his tired gaze and glanced around, as if looking for someone or something. Let's go back to camp. I'll tell you everything there. He seemed apprehensive as Adira picked up her items from the floor and nodded in agreement. They began their journey into the forest once more, with Kevin taking the lead. He was silent for the most part, until he mentioned something Adira didn't expect. Conrad's with me. I should warn you, he isn't the same. Go easy on him. Adira's eyes widened as her pace slowed down. Conrad is alive? She was now more hopeful than ever, and felt at ease knowing that the bones she saw before didn't belong to the man. It must have been a coincidence that the corpse had the same shirt. Kevin, where is Mitch? I learned that you guys got put somewhere by some people. Kevin came to an abrupt halt, and for a moment he seemed frozen in time. It wasn't till he slowly turned around that Adira's anxiety returned. He had a look on his face, one of absolute terror. The fear in his eyes said it all. Conrad and I escaped. It's not good to talk about it here. You don't know who might be listening. Adira looked around, wondering if the fanatics of God were watching them, or perhaps even God himself. She wondered if Kevin knew about the monster. Was it okay to ask? She struggled for a moment to muster up the courage until they came up to a rather shabby-looking hut. It appeared to be made by hand, and although run down a little, Adira thought it was somewhat cute. It was built in a safe spot with trees protecting it from human eyes. A small fire pit along with 2 logs was stationed up front, but there didn't seem to be anyone outside. Conrad? We have a guest! Kevin yelled as he threw his backpack to the side and motioned for Adira to enter their territory. She adjusted her clothes as she tried to see where Conrad would pop up from, but he didn't seem to be around, or at least didn't seem to want to come out. It's okay, he knows. Kevin motioned over the hut, where a rather obscure shape seemed to be staring at them from behind a dirty glass window. Adira tried to make out the face of who must have been Conrad, but he quickly went out of view. "He doesn't come out much," Kevin responded. His companion nodded slowly and made her way over the fire pit along with the men. They both sat next to each other as he grabbed a few berries from a sack on the floor and offered some to her. She took a few and stuffed them in her mouth as she tried to find a way to bring up everything. After what seemed like forever, she finally managed to find the courage. "Kevin?" "Yes?" "Can you tell me what happened with you guys? I thought Conrad was dead, and to be honest, I don't know if it's the right thing to ask, but—" Adira breathed deeply, hoping she didn't come off as crazy. "Do you know God?" "You mean like Jesus?" "No, the thing with horns." Kevin's face failed to show any emotion as he popped a berry in his mouth. His once terrified expression seemed to only be a figment of Adira's imagination, for he nodded nonchalantly and motioned around him. "Maybe once or twice." Adira was slightly disturbed that he thought little of such a horrific monster, but she continued. "I heard that he's some cold god or something. These people are all women. I met one. Tried to get her to tell me what happened to you guys and Mitch, but I thought you all were dead." Kevin made no attempt to make eye contact with his guest. He continued picking through berries, taking off stems and tossing some that were no good. The silence seemed to last ages until he nodded and glanced up at the fire in front of him. "I'm sorry, Adira. He helped us escape, but we have no idea what happened to him." Adira felt her heart sink as she took in his words. Her gaze fell to the floor, absorbing everything that had been said, as she repeated it over and over. She slowly stood up, ready to excuse herself for some alone time, before Kevin took a hold of her arm. He firmly stared into her eyes and said something that chilled her to the bone. "Be careful out there, Adira. It's hunting season, just not for us anymore." His fingers slipped loose as he let the frightened woman go, resuming his unending gaze into the flames. Adira wrapped her wrist, eyes widening as she cautiously stepped back. Somehow the two men, her and Mitch, once knew were dead and gone. Nothing but strange, airy shells were left behind, and Adira could see it in his eyes. She knew Conrad must have been affected as well. "I'll be back," she managed to choke out. "Have to pee." Without another word or a backwards glance, the woman slowly retreated into the shadows. Chapter 21. Devotion. Adira stayed the night at Kevin and Conrad's camp. A small tent with a few holes was pitched right outside the cabin, which was apparently off limits to her. Kevin told her Conrad was in there all day and didn't want to interact with anyone. He didn't bother him either, and pointed out he spent his nights outdoors in his tent. "Will I ever get to see him?" the curious woman questioned, hoping to see another familiar face, yet fearful of what she might discover. Conrad was enshrouded in mystery, and it made Adira feel uncomfortable. "Maybe, when he wants to," Kevin commented, patting off leaves inside his own tent as he prepared to sleep through the rest of the night. Adira was already in her little fortress, grateful that at least she had some form of shelter. She waited for Kevin to take off his jacket and climb into the structure before thanking him. "I didn't think I would ever find you all. It's like fate. Thank you for everything and saving me. We should get you and Conrad back home soon. Tomorrow, okay?" Kevin's eyes seemed to turn glassy as a rather sad expression appeared on his face. With a small nod, he crawled inside of his tent and gave a simple wave to the woman. She returned it, wondering why he wasn't as excited as she would have thought he would be. Perhaps it was because they were lost and couldn't find their way back. Was she lost also? How was she even going to bring them back home if they had most likely tried and failed? Adira's thoughts wouldn't stop plaguing her mind as she crawled further into her tent space and zipped the entrance shut. She had nothing on her to distract her, not even her phone. With regret she realized she had last left it with God. Where was God anyways? He had no problem stalking her before. Maybe this time she managed to find a good hiding spot. The woman tossed and turned for what felt like ages, thinking of Mitch, his friends, the cold, God, and the forest. Stepping into Whispering Winds was like stepping into another world completely. Nothing was quite like it seemed. Perhaps Whispering Winds was another dimension, a portal to a world like Adira's, but altered. "Adira!" She heard the low voice of a man outside her tent, causing her to flinch slightly. She cocked her head, ears strained as she quickly responded with a "yes." Something outside seemed to graze against the fabric of her small home, but Adira wasn't afraid. She recognized the voice, and with her heart in her throat, she unzipped the entrance. A man with a walking stick in his hand stood before her, one leg hovering over the floor, while the other was planted firmly on the ground. Adira was caught off guard by this, and glanced up to see the face of the man. He was covered in shadows, however, and the dying fire pit couldn't provide enough light. "Conrad?" Adira muttered knowingly, carefully making her way out of the tent. She didn't mean to stare at his missing foot for too long, but it was a sight that shocked her to the core. She didn't know what to say, trying to make out a small glimpse of Conrad's face in the darkness. She could have sworn she saw two round, lidless eyes, but knew her mind was playing tricks on her. "You need to leave," Conrad abruptly spoke, his scratchy, fading voice a mere whisper in the night. Adira was taken aback, cocking her head in confusion as she attempted to understand what he had told her. "I didn't hear you. Did you?" Conrad pointed behind her, causing the woman to turn her head back. She didn't see anything at first, until a series of faint whispers caught her attention. They said her name, over and over again in different voices she did not recognize. It was almost as if they were trying to grab her attention. Her eyes darted around the dark trees surrounding them. She was going to ask Conrad what he was pointing at until she saw him. It was only a dark shadow, but she recognized the outline of the horns and body. God was rising from the floor, bones cracking as his long claws twitched in anticipation. Adira unintentionally grabbed onto Conrad from fear, only to feel cold, hard skin. She flinched away from his hand and stepped back, aware of a familiar presence directly behind her. Icy breath traveled down her back, causing her skin to come alive. He's been waiting for you, Adira. Conrad was suddenly twitching and bending at awkward angles, growing taller until he was just about as big as God. Adira couldn't describe how awful and deformed he appeared before her now. She screeched only after Conrad's long fingers wrapped around her wrist and pulled her closer to him. His large, blooded eyes that could not blink bore into her soul and thoughts. She heard his disfigured voice ringing in her head. "He's alive!" Adira didn't scream where her eyes popped open. She took in her surroundings, heavy breathing slowing down. Once she realized she had suffered a nightmare. When she had fallen asleep, she did not know. She was sure Conrad never came out, but the visions that played in her mind over and over refused to leave. It all felt so real. She could still feel Conrad's rough grip and God's cool breath traveling down her neck and spine. Adira felt goosebumps starting to form and sat up, rubbing her arms to shake away the uneasy feelings. A few birds chirping outside her tent let her know sunrise was imminent. She wrapped herself in her sleeping bag and laid back down, taking in the events her brain had imagined. He was waiting for her. He's alive. What could it possibly mean? Chapter 22. Deal with the Devil. "What do you mean?" Adira asked in confusion, bewildered by what Kevin had just told her. "It's best if you head back and join the people you were with. Adira, it's not safe for you. You don't know half of what's out here." Kevin repeated himself slowly, making sure the woman knew he was serious. She didn't seem to like his response, however, and stayed sitting on a log next to her tent. With a shake of her head, she firmly crossed her arms over her chest. "I've seen enough to know we all shouldn't be here. Why don't you guys just come with me? There are people who know the way back home." Kevin stayed silent as he packed his backpack with some spare items laying around. Adira couldn't believe they were just going to continue living in the forest, and persisted. "Please, Kevin, think of Conrad and your guys' family. They think you're dead." Her thoughts went to Mitch, and all at once her heart fell. "Please don't give up hope. I know there is a way out. 3 is better than 2, right? I recognize some places, and—" She thought of God, who knew every part of the forest. She had promised to stay with him, and in return he would liberate the lost man. Perhaps after setting Kevin and Conrad free, she would fulfill her end of the bargain, on the condition that Mitch be found. He couldn't just disappear into thin air. Something had to be left. "I know someone who can help us. Just please trust in me and go through with it." Adira wouldn't take no for an answer. She stood up from her seat and motioned for him to stay put. "Please give me an hour or something. I'm not sure where he is, but I will find him, or he will find me. I just ask you to keep an open mind." Kevin didn't seem too eager to go through with everything, but exchanged a sad, sympathetic smile and nodded. He placed his back on the floor and reached into his pocket to pull out a knife. Carefully, he outstretched it towards Adira, who hesitantly accepted it. "There's things out there, Adira." Adira gave a simple nod, examining the pocket knife with sad surprise. It was a birthday gift from Mitch to him. The knife was a little used up, but still in good condition. She patted her shorts pocket, where her necklace lay, and swallowed back a knot. "I'll be back," she promised, and squeezed the knife in her grip as she whirled away. Finding God couldn't be hard. He had eyes all over. Maybe if she yelled out his name, he would come. First thing first, she had to create some distance from her and the camp. Couldn't risk giving away the two men's location if things went south with the beast. This time around, Adira carefully planned her route and made sure she marked trees with small incisions. Only she would notice. After what felt like a good 10 minutes of walking, the woman quickly concealed her weapon and sat on a nearby boulder. She glanced around herself, breathing slowly as fear settled upon her. The forest was unusually quiet, and the sky as bleak as ever. Drops of rain began to fall upon her, causing her to shiver. She wished she was wearing a jacket, or at least a pair of comfortable pants. At this rate, Adira was bound to get sick sooner or later.
"I thought you were dead."
The monstrous voice of the god of the forest suddenly rang around Adira, causing her heart to leap in her chest as she searched for the owner. With her head held high, she sat up and attempted to regain some confidence. "I need your help. I found—"
"And what's this?"
God descended from the dark shadows, as malevolent as ever. Adira couldn't help but feel terrified, as the large beast towered over her, reminding her of every horrible thing she had experienced in the forest. Her voice got caught in her throat, and no words could escape her lips, despite them moving.
"You come to me for help in another man's clothing? You're not very loyal to your boyfriend after all, are you?"
This seemed to break the paralysis that had temporarily taken over Adira. She balled up her hand into a fist and shook her head vigorously. "No, you don't understand. I managed to find people. That's why I need your help. It's 2 of the 3 men I was looking for." God circled Adira, inspecting her from head to toe, like she was a fine chunk of meat. Unexpectedly, and out of the blue, he asked,
"I'm wondering where you slept last night. I didn't see you anywhere."
"I told you I found—" "Hey! What are you doing?" God's pitch-black face and glowing eyes were now pressed against Adira's body, sniffing every inch of her like a dog. Instinctively, she slapped his face as hard as she could, wincing at the pain it brought upon her hand. God seemed momentarily caught off guard, before stepping back and straightening up. His claws twitched with hidden emotion, and it was only when Adira noticed this that she took note of a morbid detail. Blood was dripping from the tips of his fingers, signaling to her he had just killed someone before finding her. There was even fresh blood on his clothing once she examined him more. "Did you do something?" Adira momentarily forgot why she was there, now focused on the horror before her. God didn't respond immediately, but took the time to roughly grab the woman by her shoulder and lead her beside him. She cowered under his touch, mind racing as she wondered what was going on.
"I want to show you something."
She didn't have time for all this. Mitch's friends needed her to bring them back home. But if she did what God wanted, Perhaps she would appeal to his better nature and convince him to help her. "Where are we going?"
If you are begging for my help, you will never run from me again. We made a deal."
God let go of Adira, leaving behind a large, bloody handprint.
You will get used to what I do, starting today.
Adira felt the pit of her stomach begin to churn horribly, and she knew what was coming next. Thank you for listening to Hunting Season by Dr. Rockhard.